David Vilaseca, who died tragically in February 2010 in London. It's wonderful to see so many of you here, and one of the advantages, I'm not going to say this was intended, but I've been going through the list coming through on the lobby, and I'm seeing so many of you here, so it's a great pleasure to see so many arriving. Thank you again for your patience as you were waiting. So the event is taking place for the second time online, and I'd like to thank the college events team, that's Sue Heath and Neil Perrett, for their help in making it happen. We're delighted also that a member of David's family is here or will be arriving very shortly, and that is David's sister, Marta. Welcome, Marta. Again, of course, because it's online, the pleasure of meeting in the picture gallery, which was one of David's favorite spaces on campus, the place where we normally have the Vilaseca lecture. The pleasure of just coming together after the lecture, talking with the speaker, reminiscing about David, friends, colleagues, family, former students. That pleasure is again denied us. Hopefully it'll be restored next year. But I hope there'll be a chance for us to come together in conversation after the lecture and the vote of thanks, and a chance to engage with some of the ideas in the Q&A. So I'd like to pass over to Dr. Ruth Hemus, who is the head of the Department of Languages, Literatures and Cultures, and also a fellow member of the Centre for Visual Cultures, who will now introduce the speaker. Ruth.
Thank you, James, and welcome everybody to this important event in our calendar. As a new head of department, it's my privilege to be given the task of introducing this year's speaker for our annual David Vilaseca Memorial Lecture. This is the 11th year of an event that we all welcome as a tribute to David in order to celebrate his life and his work. But one which also reminds us of the great loss of a colleague who was cherished by so many. When I started working with David, I was an early career fellow. A lot of time has passed since then, but I still remember very well his presence and his support as I grappled with my first lectures in higher education. In these difficult times, events that bring us together are more important than ever, and I think it's fitting that we do so in David's name. And whilst we are doing this above all to remember him, it also reminds us of the importance of collegiality. As director of the Centre for Visual Cultures, Professor James Williams continues to take great care in guiding the selection of a speaker every year who will do justice to David's legacy. This year, we all agreed readily with the choice of Dr. Isaias FANLO because of his academic credentials, his engagement in the cultural sector, and the critical and cultural frameworks with which he engages. We're pleased to welcome him to our community this evening, even though it's an online community. After his presentation, Professor Sarah Wright, our former head of department and Hispanic Studies film scholar, will give a vote of thanks, just so that you know how things will unfold. And then after that, there'll be a chance for questions. So a short biography now to introduce our guest. Dr. FANLO teaches modern and contemporary Iberian literature at the University of Cambridge. His work on Iberian cultures, scenic arts and queer theory has been published in scholarly journals and in books such as De Vidas Iberos from 2019 and the forthcoming The Unsafe Stage, due in 2022. His monograph, A Libro Rosa, 2004, The Pink Book, was a pioneering work on gender and sexuality in Catalonia. He also contributes to generalist media, where he writes about the performing arts, culture and activism. He has been editor, curator and content creator for Barcelona's Teatre Nacional de Catalunya and artistic advisor for Barcelona's Teatre Lliure. He founded Terrats en Cultura, Barcelona's awarded rooftop scenic arts festival, and he has been literary advisor for different projects in Barcelona and in Chicago. So our virtual shared space feels like a poor relation to meeting together in Egham, let alone the spaces of Catalonia. but I'm sure we're all grateful for the chance to imagine enriching and challenging possibilities thanks to Dr. Fanlo's lecture, the title of which is Defying Toponormativity, a queer reading of the performing arts in non-conventional spaces. Thank you so much for your patience, both to our speaker and all our guests, and it's time now to move to the main event.
Hi, well, thank you all for your patience. I see actually everybody who's on the waiting area. I actually see as they pop up. So I don't know if it's possible to just deprive me from that pleasure, but in any case, I will proceed. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, James. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everybody that made this possible. It's actually great to be able to organize this, even if it's only online. But I see some faces that are familiar, some friends, some colleagues, and I'm very happy to be here and to share this evening with you. So I am deeply honored to have been asked to deliver this year's David Vilaseca Memorial Lecture here at Royal Holloway. And even if this sentence sounds like the usual pleasantry that we employ every time we begin a lecture, right? Captatio benevolentia of sorts, there is a genuine truth in this case. And I hope you allow me to explain. I never got to meet David Vilaseca in person, but he and I exchanged a number of emails actually in 2009 after I had read with utter fascination his fictional memoir, L'aprenentatge de la soledat. In his writing, I found a kindred soul and a keen intellectual, capable to provide profound reflections on the cinema of Eric Rohmer or the figure of Salvador Dalí, all while addressing his exploration of cruising areas scattered around London. David Vilaseca tackled the writing of his diaries with the spirit of a fiction writer, altering the facts of his life in order to build a complex and compelling narrative. And just as it happens with the diaries of his admirer Joe Orton, although through the idea of failure, he confesses also feeling a bond with Kenneth Holloway, Orton's mentor, boyfriend, and murderer, Vilaseca successfully practices the art of self-fashioning, making us readers look at the events from the convex mirror that he has carefully composed. But most of all, David's diaries are wonderfully written, with a prose that is sharp and elegant, ambitious in creating a universe of its own. His command of the art of narration makes him, and I don't think I am exaggerating, one of the most remarkable Catalan writers of the 21st century. After reading L'aprenentatge de la soledat in 2009, I sent David a long email to thank him for having written a work that had moved me and stimulated me in a way I had not been for years. A few days later, he answered back. He thanked me for my remarks, which he found comforting. At the time, he lamented that his book had much less impact than he might have hoped. He mentioned that he had read my book, El Libro Rosa, and correspondence began between us, an intermittent correspondence in which we would mainly talk about readings, plays, and opera, each of us expressing our concerns about the precarious and developed state of non-traditional thinking in Catalan and Spanish academia. I had, at the moment, taken a hiatus from academic life and was working at Barcelona's Teatre Nacional de Catalunya as a curator, editor, and overseeing artistic discourses. Talking to David reminded me about what the best academia has to offer. He reminded me of how stimulating and energizing an intellectual exchange could be, of the potential projects that can emerge from conversations, of the constructive challenge to thrive, to improve, to be better, and to inspire others through our teaching and our research. Our exchange was brief. We had agreed that we should meet the next time he came to Barcelona, but that day unfortunately never arrived. David's abrupt and tragic death made that impossible. David's premature passing is, of course, devastating, but more than a decade later, it's no exaggeration to claim that he has left an indelible mark in both the literary and the academic worlds. David worked hard to achieve expectations that, in the end, As we can read in El Nenfarid, which is The Wounded Child, the second part of his fictionalized diaries, he feared he would never achieve. Sometimes these things just take time. I am thinking now of that moment near the end of Bulgakov's masterpiece, Master and Margarita, when Voland, the mysterious and demonic professor, arrived in Moscow to disrupt the entire city, retrieves the manuscript that the master had burned earlier in the book. As the master expresses his astonishment, Voland gives one of the most famous quotes of the novel: "Manuscripts don't burn." Decades after Bulgakov's death, that line proved to be premonitory when Russian writer and poet Vitaly Shentalinsky accessed the KGB files and managed to retrieve manuscripts that Bulgakov himself had burned for fear of being punished by the Stalin regime, but that the KGB had previously copied and stored in the writer's files the agency kept. Bulgakov's famous quote relates to something writers such as Umberto Eco claim, that once the writer publishes a piece of work, it has a life of its own, outside of the author's control. Politics or mere chance may impact the life and the death of books. Think of how Max Brod refused to obey Kafka's will and saved his unpublished work, such as The Trial or The Castle. Think about John Kennedy Toole, devastated for not being able to publish his work, Confederacy of Dunces, then released posthumously after his suicide. Think about the erratic trajectory of Lorca's play, El Público, or of his Sonnets of Dark Love, which started circulating anonymously at the beginning of the 1980s, after Lorca's family had hid them for over 40 years. I can add David's literary work to this list of, if you allow me, queer literary meanderings. The posthumous success of Els Homes i els Dies, David Vilaseca's complete fictional diaries, published in 2007 to great acclaim by readers and cultural critics who suddenly discovered one of the most refined Catalan writers of his generation, makes me feel that for once, literary justice exists. I shall return to the reception of Els Homes i els Dies at the end of this talk. Since my connection with David Vilaseca is not only academic but also personal, since there is an inevitable flow of affects, if I may, that circulates among this implausible dialogue, I will purposely navigate in this time we share the borderlines between the scholarly and the personal. I do believe in heterodoxy, as can be seen in my own double profession that has oscillated between an academic commitment and a career as a cultural manager. Part of my research is inevitably practice-led and finds a unique source of research material in my knowledge of and active participation in cultural life. Being able to see things from within and at the same time to take perspective to observe them from a certain academic distance gives me a multiple, I may say queer, vantage point. Mine is not a unique case, especially in the intersections of the disciplinary fields of queer theory and theater and performance studies. I'm thinking of scholars such as Ramon Rivera Cervera, José Esteban Muñoz, or even Lauren Berland, that have actually played their work with artistic collaborations involving the research subjects. In the end, a queer approach to scholarly thinking implies questioning pre-established paradigms and notions such as the canon, the archive, the traditional epistemic approaches, and the need for critical detachment. With this comes an ethical celebration of subjectivity and a relativization of the notion of authority that I find not only enriching and potentially productive, but also comforting. Today, I want to explore how the global financial crisis of 2008 and its aftermath, that punished severely the south of Europe, shaped not only a great majority of the plays written during this time in Catalonia, but also the venues they were performed in. I will use a theoretical perspective that is queer, which I believe will allow me to tackle the complex intersection between spaces, scenic arts, and city life. But before I start addressing the main subject of my talk, I need to add one last thing about David Vilaseca. To me, one of the most remarkable achievements in Vilaseca's academic career was that he fought to introduce queer approaches in the subfield of peninsular studies, in a moment in which testing, and I'm going to quote him, the prevailing politically affirmative and identitarian frameworks, end of quote, was regarded with utter suspicion, if not directly with disapproval. Vilaseca introduced queer approaches with the utmost rigor, as can be seen in his posthumous monograph, Queer Events, Post-Deconstructive Subjectivities in Spanish Writing and Film, 1960s to 1990s, published in 2010. Here, he analyzed the work of authors such as Terence Moix or Antonio Rosselló with a sophisticated blend of philosophical, literary, and queer epistemological approaches, creating a work that allowed for a dialogue between Gilles Deleuze, Alain Badiou, or Leo Bersani, alongside Vilaseca himself. My research, which nurtures from a queer approach, owes a debt to Vilaseca. This is why today I have decided to explore what I have called toponormativity, an approach to urban spaces and the problematization of binary categories such as public and private, launching a critical view of how these spaces are used. So let's begin. From the moment Teresa de Lauretis, widely acknowledged as the first one to apply the term queer to theory, gave her talk, Queer Theory, Lesbian and Gay Sexualities, at the University of Santa Cruz in California in 1990, an inevitable paradox emerged. Queer theory positioned itself at the margins, but it articulated its dispositioning from the central, privileged spaces of academia. Consequently, from its very inception, queer theory has had to navigate this contradiction. This could be the reason why it has mutated, evolved again, and re-articulated itself in order to incorporate other voices and other dialogues, going from queer theory in singular to a more accurate queer theories in plural. It has found a sometimes problematic niche in different cultures and in different times, as the dynamics and the locations of the margins have also varied. Queer theories have also been questioned from the very academic inception and were pronounced dead right after being born. In the field of Iberian studies, Paco Vidarte, the author of the Queer Manifesto Ética Marica, Queer Ethics, questioned how coherent the standpoint of queer theory was when being articulated from the ivory tower of academia. The paradox, however, cannot be escaped. Vidarte, who was by then teaching a course on queer theory in the UNED, the Spanish online university, wrote that article while pushing for the presence of queer theory in academia. In any case, queer is an elusive concept, epistemologically slippery, and therefore its revel aspect seems inevitable. In any case, to me, this does not signal that the term is obsolete or that queer theories are, as James Penny and others have claimed, dead. Quite the opposite, actually, in these ever-changing times we happen to live in which fashionable ideas and concepts are generated, voraciously devoured, and mercilessly abandoned, the mutability and adaptability of queer approaches seems to be more pertinent, more Maidonius than ever before. It is critically important to keep interrogating the field. In the introduction of a monographic volume of social text about queer studies published in 2005, David Eng, Jack Halberstam, and José Esteban Muñoz asked themselves a critical question. Given all the achievements and the preponderance of identity politics in social, political, and academic discourses, what is queer about queer studies now? I quote, "The contemporary mainstreaming of gay and lesbian identity as mass-mediated consumer lifestyle and embattled legal category demands and renewed queer studies ever vigilant to the fact that sexuality is intersectional, not extraneous to other modes of difference." End of quote. In its first wave, queer theory articulated this discourse around the sociocultural outpouring of desire and sexuality and its radical potential. Quoting Alexander Doty in his precocious 1993 monograph, Making Things Perfectly Queer, and I quote, "By using queer, I want to recapture and reassert a militant sense of difference that views the erotically marginal as both a consciously chosen site of resistance and of location of radical openness and possibility." End of quote. Doty's idea of queerness is directly related to this transformative potential of sexuality. Nonetheless, as gay and lesbian rights progressed in Western countries, symbolically led by the achievement of egalitarian marriage, this desire-centered paradigm lost part of its radical potential. Tolerance of homosexuality has even been utilized to justify wars, invasions, and other military operations. Jasbir Puar, who argued that it was imperative to re-articulate what queer theory and studies of sexuality have to say about the meta-theories of the real politics of empire, speaks of this construction of an imperialist image of tolerance, confronting the so-called backward homophobic other in terms of homo-nationalism. Let me quote: "A form of sexual exceptionalism that corresponds with the coming out of the exceptionalism of American empire. Further, this brand of homosexuality operates as a regulatory script not only of normative gayness, queerness, or homosexuality, but also of the racial and national norms that reinforce these sexual subjects. There is a commitment to the global dominant ascendancy of whiteness that it's implicated in the propagation of the United States as empire, as well as the alliance between this propagation and this brand of homosexuality." End of quote. Puar underscores a critical fact. Through identity politics, gay and lesbian rights are being appropriated by reactionary neoliberal ideals on a global scale. Eng, Halberstam, and Muñoz also highlight, albeit in a different approach, that in the current historical juncture, queer studies have served as theoretical and ethical background to examine questions that expand beyond gender and sexuality. Therefore, it is critical to reclaim the discipline in its constructive capacity, and I quote, to mobilize a broad social critique of race, gender, class, nationality, and religion, as well as sexuality." End of quote. They also acknowledge how critical it is for queer epistemologies to embrace other debates and other voices from queer studies, mainly the ones that are formulated beyond the Anglo-American and in minor scale French academia, mostly by white masculine subjects. So in recent years, queer studies have explored the complex implications, for instance, of time vis-a-vis normativity. Influential works such as Lee Edelman's No Future in 2004, Jack Halberstam's In a Queer Time and Place, 2005, Lauren Berland's Cruel Optimism, 2008, José Esteban Muñoz, Cruising Utopia, 2009, and Elizabeth Freeman's Time Binds, 2010, delve into queerness as a way to problematizing and reconceptualizing topics regarding past, present, and future, such as genealogies, normative timelines, the tension between memory and history, and the traditional expectations of the good life. Among the promiscuity of ideas and concepts that this temporal term, as labeled by Tyler Bradway and E.L. McGallum, has bequeathed to us, Freeman's notion of chrononormativity, coined to designate how our heteronormative society creates a sequence of the normative development of the human timeline, like education, work, time of marriage, time of reproduction, retirement, mortgage, etc., and rejects those who don't pledge to it, has proven a compelling theoretical concept to question, for instance, traditional depictions of the family in the arts, as well to approach issues regarding egalitarian access to education. Even if it lacks the spectacular sense of urgency of queer time analysis, especially when addressing how the AIDS pandemic put into question notions like the hope for a future, an analogous non-normative epistemological approach to space can, and I think should, be contemplated. It seems that, according to the totemic Marxist theories such as David Harvey in the field of geography or Friedrich Jameson in cultural criticism, queer approaches to space should be rendered somehow irrelevant. At least they seem blatantly absent from the postmodern geographical analysis. But this inclusion, which promotes a division between desire and the realm of the private versus work and the realm of the public, might be too restricting when addressing non-normative logics and associations of communities in space. As Jack Halberstam states in the beginning of In a Queer Time and Place, I quote, "Queer uses of time and space develop at least in part, in opposition to institutions of family, heterosexuality, and reproduction. They also develop according to other logics of location, movement, and identification. End of quote. I would add that these queer uses of space and of time might question the triumphalist narrative arc of neoliberal capitalism, as I will show. I propose then toponormativity as a concept that signals the traditional and normative usages of space. Conversely, a queer approach to the space addresses counterintuitive placemaking practices, such as space redefinition of appropriation, which might also challenge traditional binary divisions between global and local. A queer reading of spaces, therefore, is a form of resistance against toponormative uses of the city, including the separation between public and private and the dynamics of gentrification and unsustainable tourism. Steve Pyle argues that resistance has traditionally been understood in an oppositional way as a reaction to power. And I quote, "So power is held by an elite who use oppressive, injurious, and contemptible means to secure their control. Meanwhile, resistance is the people fighting back in defense of freedom, democracy, and humanity." End of quote. Alternatively, though, resistance can be considered in a non-binary manner, or, as we would say, uncoupled from domination, not as a mere reaction, but as a more complex process circumscribed in a specific socio-political context, and simultaneously articulating other kinds of affects. In other words, resistance should not only be understood as the reverse of domination, but as a queer, more sophisticated combination of anger, planning, creativity, capacity, and coincidence, among others. Therefore, in the particular queer problematization of toponormativity that I would like to examine, I believe there is more at stake than a simple reaction to a moment of crisis, critical as this moment was. Queer reclaimings of a city through scenic arts emerge inevitably within a specific context, but they transcend this context to redefine the way the event interacts with their surroundings. And actually, like David Vilaseca, I understand event in a Badiouian sense, as a drama that emerges powerfully in open situations. For clarifications, I will add that I see events in a holistic manner, that is, embracing not only the scenic arts performance, but also extra-scenic elements, including venue, lighting, stage, design, and audience, as interdependent elements in the performative ecosystem. So I wanted to show, let me see if that is possible. Here. Okay, can you see the PowerPoint presentation? I think so. Okay, so I am not going to use the PowerPoint presentation because then I don't see your faces, and it's actually nice to have the impression that there's somebody on the other side. But I wanted to very briefly show you these images because I wanted to start this section by saying that there is something wonderfully queer emerging in the intersection between place and performative works, such as Smiling by Guillaume Clou in 2012. In the image, we can see actually the two actors of Smiley interacting with the audience that were partially on stage. A mí no me escribió Tennessee Williams by Marc Rosic and the Compañía Roberto G. Alonso in 2016. This is an image of Roberto G. Alonso, the protagonist of A mí no me escribió, in the space where the play took place, in this case underneath a bridge. La Lista by Kim Vigas in 2017. This is a performative work that takes place in the rooftop of Barcelona, as we will see as part of the Festival Terrats en Cultura, Rooftops for Culture. Or Ocaña, Reina de las Ramblas by Marc Rosic in 2019. This is actually an image of a performance of Ocaña in the middle of the countryside in Lleida, in the west part of Catalonia. This was in an orchard. So there is something wonderfully queer emerging in the intersection between this place and cultural initiatives such as Girona's Torneig de Dramaturgia Catalana, Barcelona's Rooftop Festival Terrats en Cultura, or Madrid's performative spaces, La Casa de la Portera and La Pensión de las Pulgas, an eclectic set of reactions that, considered intersectionally, paint a promising and promiscuous canvas of responses within a troublesome context. And now I'm going to end the presentation because I want to see you. Okay, here we are. Indeed, to fully consider how these works and spaces articulate a queer discourse of resistance, the milieu needs to be addressed. As many of us find hard to forget, in the years 2007 and 2008, the world suffered a severe economic recession. This global financial crisis, considered by many the worst recession since the Great Depression of 1929, was a perfect storm caused by a number of factors. The bankruptcy of the global financial services firm Lehman Brothers in September of 2008 represents the climax of this crisis, the effects of which expanded like a tsunami of devastating consequences in the different economies of the planet. Spain and the south of Europe suffered those consequences with particular virulence. When the housing bubble finally and expectedly burst in 2008, it exposed the unsustainable Spanish GDP growth rate, built upon a high inflation rate and a family indebtedness supported by the bank's industry's fraudulent practices, among others. Unable to bail out its financial sector, the country became a late participant in the European sovereign debt crisis in 2012, forcing the public and the private sectors into a previously unimaginable regime of austerity. The consequences for the working classes were immediately palpable, and they can be summed up in the subsequent terrible equation. Elevated inflation rates plus unsustainable unemployment rates, jumping from less than 9% in 2007 to almost double 2 years later, and to a peak of 27% in 2013. And I am actually not even talking about the unemployment rates among the population under 25, which actually peaked over 50%, always according to the Spain's Instituto Nacional de Estadística. You will not be surprised if I mention that the collapse of the economic system hit particularly hard the already precarious cultural network of the country. These effects were exacerbated in July 2012, when the Spanish government, ruled by Mariano Rajoy's conservative party, Partido Popular, decreed to raise the VAT for culture from 8% to 21%, in the case of live shows, leading to a decrease of over 31% of spectators and almost 33% of the revenue from 2011 to 2012. Just a spectacular thunderstorm generating by opposing forces, a cluster of low pressure meeting its nemesis in the highest layer of the troposphere, the crisis in the cultural sector clashed in Catalonia with what has been called the golden age of Catalan drama. This unprecedented dawn of playwrights, dramaturgists, and performers are, I believe, a consequence of several successful initiatives to promote theater writing, such as the creation of the Sala Beckett, an international theater hub and theater school that connected Catalan playwrights with figures such as Harold Pinter, Lars Noren, or Simon Stephens. The growth of the Institut del Teatre as the school for theater professional, and the success of Projecte Tesis, which is a project that sponsored young Catalan playwrights to write and premiere their work at the Teatre Nacional de Catalunya. This created the ideal breeding ground for the blossoming of an extraordinary number of playwrights for a culture as small, at least speaking in demographic terms, as it is the Catalan culture. The international impact that these Catalan authors had was also unparalleled. According to the platform Catalan Drama, dedicated to translating Catalan theater and to promoting it around the world, from January 2015 to July 2016, a total of 53 Catalan plays from 17 different authors were premiered outside of Catalonia in countries as diverse as Japan, Argentina, Chile, Germany, the United Kingdom, Turkey, or the United States of America. And yet, as this nurtured generation of playwrights and dramaturgists most of them both born in the 70s and the 1980s, generated a copious amount of work, some of which I dare say of remarkable quality. The accelerating economic recession forced a number of venues to take drastic measures. Private spaces such as Club Capitol or Sala Muntaner closed for good. Actually, this week there was announced the closure of another of those spaces, Sala Fenix. And the public sector, too, suffered enormously. The two main public theater institutions in Barcelona, the Teatre Lliure and the Teatre Nacional de Catalunya, TNC, were also severely impacted. The Lliure was forced to cease activity for 3 months, and the TNC shut one of its three venues, the Sala Tallers, which is where the T6 project of contemporary Catalan dramaturgy was taking place, and restructured its budget to severe artistic and staff impact. Again, this was the perfect storm. A growing number of creators with a decreasing number of venues, each working with a much lower budget. Vocations to fulfill, spectators to satisfy, mouths to feed. In order to find a solution for this growing dissatisfaction, alternatives needed to be imagined, aside from the legitimate but sterile street actions in defense of the culture. Demonstrations that paraded the streets of Barcelona and other cities in the Catalan-speaking areas in July 2012, under the motto, La cultura no es un luxe, culture is not a luxury. One of the reactions to this crisis and its subsequent budget reduction, or sometimes suppression, was to downsize productions. In 2010, Guillem Cluas Marburg premiered at TNC Sala Petita with a cast of 10 actors. The productions of Projecte Assis relied on a stable company of 9. In contrast, starting in 2012, an increase of productions for 2, 3, and sometimes 4 actors started appearing, among them Josep Maria Mirós' El Principi d'Arquímedes, Archimedes' Principle, one of the most successful European plays of the 21st century, premiering in July 2012 at Barcelona Sala Beckett and translated into more than 15 languages for over 20 productions and stage readings around the world. 2 very different initiatives excelled, in my opinion, in turning this crisis into an opportunity, although I hate that expression, to generate a volume of remarkable works. The first one was Barcelona Sala Flyhard, which opened in 2010 as a space to host the small productions of the Flyhard Company, led by the successful commercial playwright Jordi Casanovas, which soon thereafter began producing text by the most renowned Catalan playwrights, from the already mentioned Guillem Cluas and Josep Maria Miró to younger dramaturgists such as Daniel J. Meyer, Claudia Sadó, or Joan Llago. The size of the venue, which with a small stage and 2 terraces that seat a total of 100 spectators, ran on a modest budget, allowing for small, crafty productions. The second initiative I'm going to mention is going to be Girona's Torneig de Dramaturgia Catalana, the Tournament of Catalan Dramaturgy, created in 2011 under the auspices of Girona's prestigious Temporada Alta Theatre Festival. Each year, the tournament features 8 new plays written for 2 actors that compete in a system in which the audience decides by popular vote which play moves on to the next round, without knowing who the author of the play is. Furthermore, the formula has been exported with success to other system tournaments now take place annually in places like Palma de Mallorca or Lima in Peru. Aside from promoting modest, cast-reduced productions, these 2 initiatives have something in common, an aim for decentralization. It seems nothing short of a paradox for a country like Catalonia, which has been rightfully critical about the Spanish centralized economic system that puts Madrid in the center of everything, to inject so many resources to its saturated, densely populated capital, Barcelona, at the expense of the rest of the territory. So much so that, as I mentioned elsewhere, Catalonia, often defined as a stateless nation, in spite of its anachronistic aspirations to be a normal country, keeps reinforcing its own macrocephalic, deformed-shaped. Barcelona, the city of wonders, the great enchantress, swallows in its insatiable hunger the vast majority of the country's resources. It concentrates most of the museums and cultural centers and is home to almost every theater company, as well as most of the scenic arts venues with a stable season. Barcelona also has its own saturated city center. So we have a center within the center, where most of these institutions are located. So by opening a private theater space in the Sants working class neighborhood, outside of the imaginary borders of the central areas such as Ciutat Vella, Raval, Alborn, and the Eixample, Sala Flyhart makes a critical statement. There can be life outside of downtown Barcelona. Similarly, the success of Torneigs de Dramaturgia organically questions the territorial imbalance of the country by proving that not every theatrical event needs to take place in the capital. As a direct effect of these initiatives, many of the most successful plays of the last decades have been conceived as monologues or sometimes for a small cast of 2 to 4. Some successful examples: Jordi Galceran's El Crèdit, Cristina Clemente's La Nostra Champions Particular, and Pere Riera's Red Pontiac. These 3 plays were created in the context of the very first Torneig de Dramaturgia in 2012 and enjoyed a healthy afterlife in the commercial theaters of Barcelona, of Catalunya, and Spain. Also, Marta Butxaca's Litus, 2012, turned into a film in 2019. Marc Creuet's El Rei Borni, 2013, turned into a film in 2016. Llàtzer García Lapols, in 2014, Claudia Sedós Tortugas, 2015, Marc Angelet's Life Spoiler, 2017, or Daniel J. Mayer's multi-awarded AKA, also known as, from 2019. I see this as an interdependent phenomenon that comes as a result of the need to adjust to this particular zeitgeist. Some of these younger playwrights took these modest productions, in terms of cast and crew, as an opportunity to free their imaginations and to experiment without the boundaries set by more expensive productions. Conversely, the venues that hosted these productions felt less pressure when commissioning work from young playwrights, small productions being a lower economic risk. Boosted by her success with Tortugas, for instance, Claudia Sedó gained the experience and the confidence necessary to embrace more ambitious products such as Una gossa en un descampat, premiered at Barcelona Sala Beckett in 2019, and Mare de Sucre, premiered this year at TNC Sala Tallers, both of them to extraordinary and well-deserved acclaim. La Calórica, a very peculiar case of a young company that works as a cooperative, needed 10 successful years creating small-sized productions where they criticized the precariousness of that their generation is facing, such as Sobre el fenómeno de las feines de merda, so about the phenomenon of shitty jobs, and the celebrated Fairfly, both premiered at Tantaras, the very small venue of Teatre Tantarantana in 2015 and 2016, before given the opportunity to premiere their sold-out shows at the 2 large public theaters of Catalunya, Teatre Lliure, where they premiered The Feísima Enfermedad y Muy Triste Muerte de la Reina Isabel I in 2020, and Teatre Nacional de Catalunya, de què parlem mentre no parlem de tota aquesta merda, what we talk about when we are not talking about all this shit, in 2021. Aside the downsizing of theater productions, there is an equally important consequence to the recession: the emergence of alternative performative spaces. As venues kept closing their doors, it became blatantly clear that traditional institutions, all of them, public and private, strongly dependent on public revenue in different degrees, were not necessarily reliable in a time of crisis, and that theater and performing arts needed to escape the constraints of the old-fashioned theatrical venue in order to unfold. In Madrid, José Martret and Alberto Purenvidia opened up La Casa de la Portera in 2012, and immediately after, La Pensión de las Pulgas. 2 small apartments in the popular neighborhood of La Latina turned into performative spaces. According to their founders, this new concept of scenic spaces promoted, and I quote, new modalities and ways to understand artistic creation in general and theater in particular. end of quote, following the same model than alternative venues such as Buenos Aires Timbre 4, the experimental theater in a private house created by Claudio Tolcachir, where the worldwide phenomenon of La Omisión de la Familia Coleman was created and performed for the first time. In their short life, since both venues closed in 2015 due to being unable to adjust to health standards and safety protocols, La Pensión de las Pulgas and La Casa de la Portera hosted shows by Compañía Nacional de Danza and by playwrights such as Paco Becerra or Blanca Bardagil. There are more examples of alternative reclamation of spaces for performance arts in Barcelona, such as Festival Píndoles or Trece, Roberto G. Alonso's rehearsal space, turned into a performative venue for its underground cabaret Trece. None of them, though, are loaded with the complex intersectional blend of artistic and activist discourse that Terrats en Cultura bears. Terrats en Cultura, Barcelona's rooftop festival, is a hybrid project created by the Cultural Association Coincidences in 2013, at the peak of the recession, right after the cultural VAT had climbed to 21% for scenic arts. The project structure relied on two pillars. The first one was related to cultural activism. It aimed to fulfill the need for playwrights and performers to find spaces to show their work in a moment where venues were shut down. The second pillar, equally relevant for the project, was to reclaim a sustainable way of living in Barcelona after the burst of the housing bubble, the diminishing of the acquisitive power of the general population, combined with an accelerated process of gentrification due to the city's dramatic increase in mass tourism. The organization chose the rooftops as their space of intervention for several reasons. First, because the rooftops had traditionally been of symbolic significance for the city, probably because of Barcelona's blend of temperate climate and densely populated areas. The rooftops has been historically a meeting point where neighbors would coincide to hang the laundry, to have the building management meetings, or just to enjoy the sun. As a place for socialization and camaraderie, the rooftops of Barcelona became part of the human landscape of the city, and as such, they had been painted by Pablo Picasso, photographed by Colita, or included in the novels of Mercè Rodoreda. Second, the expansion of peer-to-peer flat rental platforms such as Airbnb had impacted negatively on the traditional usage of rooftops as communal spaces. In order to avoid conflictive uses of those spaces, such as parties, many owners decided to close down the rooftops of their own buildings. Therefore, reclaiming the rooftops as a space that could be used in a sustainable manner launched a message regarding the recuperation of historic community bonds, then endangered, if not directly extinguished. Moreover, claiming and reclaiming this space through immersive and alternative cultural events in a country obsessed with critical identity debates that led to the unofficial referendum for independence of October 2017, inevitably articulated a utopian, even more queer, discourse about what Catalan and the Catalan identities meant. I use the word utopian with intention. Reclaiming the rooftops of the city as open spaces for socialization, Terrats en Cultura appealed to the original utopian vision of Ildefons Cerdà's plan for the expansion of Barcelona. Designed in 1860, the Pla Cerdà originally intended to preserve the center of the manzanas, square blocks of buildings, as gardens and other spaces open to the neighbors. The access to the gardens was open, since most of the manzanas did not have their four sides built. However, the rapid population growth of the city altered the original plans, creating a hyper-dense area of fully constructed blocks. Reclaiming the rooftops as a space open for the citizens seems then to agree with the utopian views of Pla Cerdà. According to the Barcelona City Hall, the rooftops of the city combine for a total surface of 1,700 hectares, twice the extension of the Eixample. In a city so densely constructed, with so few parks, the rooftops seem the only way to generate the open, public spaces that Cerdà envisioned. Terrats embedded the quintessential organic outcome of a shift of paradigm stemming from the effects of the global crisis and the saturation of Barcelona as a city severely punished by gentrification and unsustainable tourism. The key to the initiative's success is, in my view, connected to a successful pairing. On one hand, the ephemeral appropriation of alternative, decentralized spaces. And on the other hand, a set of plays and performative works that question the traditional family, such as Marilia Semper's Pequeños Monstruos, 2013, Kiko Culebra's El Esperanza, 2015, Elena Tornero's Stew from 2017, or Guillem Clua's Smiley in 2020. Through the promotion of hybrid pieces that interrogate the traditional gender binarism of roles in flamenco, like Juan Carlos Lerida, Niño de Elche, Sexto Acercamiento al Cante, 2014, Fernando López Parras, Bailar en Hombre, 2017, and Paul López awarded a Género in 2018, through the staging of pieces that reclaim queer readings of the recent history of Barcelona, such as Marrosic's Que fue de Andrés Villarrosa, 2018, or the aforementioned Ocaña Reina de las Ramblas in 2019, and most especially by providing immersive and interdisciplinary experiences that break the fourth wall, problematize the traditional passivity of the spectator, and explore the limits and the boundaries of the theatrical event, such as Teatro de Cerca, Que te vaya bonito, 2014, or Kim Vigas La Lista in 2018, which was one of the photos that I actually showed before. It is plausible to read this reclaiming of the rooftop as a queer act of resistance against the toponormative city, victim of urbanist speculation and gentrification efforts that have contradicted the utopian aim of Ildefons Cerdà. And it seems pertinent to reclaim these spaces through queer artistic works that turn the rooftops into liminal spaces, neither public nor private, at least while the performance lasts. It showcases works that also interrogate the audience about the physical environment in which they unfold, as well as established, taken for granted, normative conventions of our times. It helps create a unique moment of defiance, of an ephemeral outburst of queer catharsis. Well, I would like to finish by going back to David Vilaseca. The success of the smaller productions have opened the doors of the larger venues in Catalonia to a younger generation of playwrights. After decades of reluctance, now the artistic directions of these large traditional institutions have begun to trust contemporary Catalan dramaturgy. It happened with Josep Maria Mirós Temps Salvatge in 2018 and with Guillem Clua's Justícia in 2020, both premiered at TNC's Sala Gran, the largest venue where normally contemporary playwrights would never premiere. And it will happen again in 2022, when the largest theatrical stage of the National will premiere as a stage adaptation of Els homes i els dies, David Vilaseca's fictionalized diaries. I can't hide a certain sense of pride when I say that this was one of my contributions as an advisor to Carme Portacelli's first season as an artistic director of the TNC. But most of all, I'm very happy to see how David's work finds, too, a well-deserved consolidation on stage. So with this good news, I will take this opportunity to finish. Thank you so much to all of you for listening.
Thank you, Isaias. I feel we need to applause, but perhaps we can.
Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Yeah. I feel we ought to applaud, but anyway, I'm going to progress now to my vote of thanks. So thank you, Isaias, for your truly wonderful talk. Thank you for sharing with us a piece of work that is full of love and also full of connections, trajectories, memories, encouragement, new understandings, contingencies, and events. Before this talk, we spoke, and it was not lost on me that we were brought together due to our shared connection with David. Your kindness about a piece I wrote many years ago now on the Catalan director Calixto Vieto reminded me later how earnestly kind David had been about that same piece when I came to Royal Holloway for interview, and the way he took the time to follow up later with further thoughts by email. But I had met David earlier when I stood in for his class on contemporary Spanish narrative at Southampton, when he had funded research leave, and he'd been a terrific mentor and colleague. In addition to being a brilliant scholar and a searching intellectual, he was also such a deeply warm human being. After speaking to you, Isaias, about your work as a curator and artistic director in Barcelona, and then also at parallel, a scholar and teacher in Chicago and now Cambridge, I was eager to read your thesis, Staging a Queer Nation, Landscapes of Desire in Catalan Drama from the University of Chicago. I hope that you're planning to publish this wonderful piece of work which brings contemporary cutting-edge theatre to the reader through a queer understanding of spaces and temporalities, and captures on the page a little bit of the magic, as you put it so eloquently, of contemporary Catalan performance practice. You have extraordinary clarity in your writing and are an excellent guide. I was delighted to see that in the thesis you write about Guillem Clua's Smiley, a work that I've unfortunately not had the opportunity to see in performance, with its fantastic breaking of the fourth wall and homage to queer Barcelona. But I have read the text, with Marion Peter Holt's English translation helping me through the Catalan. Your reading, which brings together queer temporalities with an understanding of how the queer event, not now Baduyan, but now Vilasecan, I think we can say, can loosen both heteronormative and homonormative frameworks. Your reading has helped me to understand that play properly for the first time. What emerges from your paper today is the importance of non-normative kinships relations, and how it's often through people's writing that we can develop strong bonds. It was wonderful to hear how important David's writing has been to you, both his scholarly writing and his semi-fictional diaries, and indeed the blend of practice and scholarship is something that you both share, as well as in the more ephemeral domain of email communication. I don't think it's an exaggeration after hearing you today and reading your thesis to say that his work has stimulated you and provided a form of mentorship to you. This is probably the best that academia has to offer, the potential for inspiration and the generation of such deep connections which often take place through writing. Your connection to David has given rise to echoes in your writing, to round tables that you've helped to organise in Catalonia on the importance of David's work, and indeed to this talk today. And I'm hoping we'll hear more about David's afterlife of his writing on the stage. Alongside kinships, we can also see in your paper today the importance of trajectories in their non-normative progression through time. I love the sense of your returning to ideas begun in your pioneering work, The Pink Book, which has a section on queer spaces in Barcelona, and which you've continued to develop sporadically through your journalism. For my own part, I was excited to think how far Catalan theatrical spaces have evolved since I visited Barcelona as a foreign talent scout for Edinburgh's Travers Theatre in the 90s, and met with José Sánchez Sinisterra at the Sala Beckett. Catalan theatre was exciting then, superior to the Madrid scene, but as you say, it has in the intervening years been moulded and shaped by austerity, the raising of VAT on live shows and concomitant decrease in audience numbers, as well as the need to reduce cast numbers, resources and rents. How amazing then to know about the ways that this theatre, bullied by austerity, has emerged with such resilience into a space for truly illuminating queer performance. You've been modest about your own participation in the Terrats and Cultura, the rooftop scenic art scene. How fitting that, as you say, the rooftops are being reclaimed from Airbnb tenancies to something that even Barcelona's architect Cerdà would have celebrated, the public open space for communal celebration. This is truly a queer event, in the sense that David used it, bringing together performance, sexuality and space to disrupt the social, political and symbolic paradigms. It's marvellous that the margins now come to occupy centre stage as young playwrights are taken up by the Lliure and the Teatre Nacional de Catalunya. How wonderful that David's writing should have an afterlife there, and I'm sure that many of us would like to ask you more about this. You mentioned to me that you wish that we could all be together today in at Royal Holloway in person, and it would indeed be nice now to be able to come to speak to you in person about your talk, but we can, of course, do that in a different way together now online. Being online does have some advantages, in spite of our technical difficulties. The ability for those far afield to be here with us today. And I'd like to thank the events team at Royal Holloway, Sue Heath, Neil Perrott, and of course, James Williams, Director of the Centre for Visual Studies, for hosting. In spite of the ephemeral virtual environment, in your talk you've generated a real warmth of feeling and a shared sense of community that's lasting. Thank you for bringing a little bit of queer Barcelona to us and for sharing your work and your appreciation of David. I'll end my vote of thanks here on behalf of all of us, and if we were in person, I would raise a glass to you. Thank you, Isaias.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah, and obviously thank you, Isaias, for a really wonderful, powerful, invigorating talk, covering so many different spaces, intellectual spaces, theoretical spaces, real spaces, material spaces, for theatre. And I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. I know that we started late for technical reasons, but I think that we can certainly carry on for another 10 minutes or so, at least. And I'd like to invite everyone to raise their hand, or perhaps put in the chat any questions they may have for you, Isaias, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The chat is actually a very powerful tool in these cases.
It is. So are there any questions at all? Immediate questions or thoughts or reflections?
Remembrances of David.
Of course, and that too. Okay, we have one question here, but it's hidden under number 19. So who could that be? Eddie Hughes. Hi, Eddie. You're on mute, Eddie.
I've allowed Eddie to unmute, so you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
The microphone on the top right part of the screen.
Just to the left of leave at the top right, Eddie.
You have this little icon of a microphone.
Okay.
I think.
Okay, we're unable to hear Eddie right now.
James, perhaps have you got any thoughts or questions while Eddie's sort of trying to work out how to unmute?
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Okay. I do have one question, and it was really that sense of just how material these spaces are, Isaias, that you were talking about. I mean, I sort of got a sense that you weren't interested particularly in any querying of concrete space, material space, for example, through virtual platforms. I mean, which one might think over the last couple of years would maybe lead to a reclaiming of the notion of space, you know, in virtual terms. But I didn't get that from your lecture. And I wondered if, therefore, when you're talking about, you know, the rooftop spaces in Barcelona, you're talking about historically formed, geographically grounded centres, whether that is crucial for your notion of this sort of intersectionality, this queer intersectionality of space that you referred to when you were talking about the sort of the tradition of queer theory around time and space. So it's that sort of sense of just how real are these spaces then? How real do they need to be performative in the way that you are theorizing?
So allow me, can you like ask the question again, because I was hearing some noise at the same time, and I understood properly, sorry.
Okay. It was really just to get a sense of how real these spaces, the alternative performative spaces are that you were referring to as a kind of reclaiming of institutional performative spaces, scenic spaces, as you presented them. In other words, do they have to be real? Do they have to be material and concrete, and embedded within sort of the urban space, or could they be more, well, I want to say virtual?
Well, I would say that unfortunately, and this is a clear example of this, the real or the material and the virtual are very different, and they should be thought, I believe, in different terms and under different epistemologies, let's say. But in the case of I'm seeing the chat, so I'm closing the chat. In terms of thinking the virtual as a space that can be queered and problematized, I think we need a different, honestly, we need a different epistemology. We have the spaces. I mean, there is a very clear reading of the traditional within the usages of space. The virtual world was born in a completely different manner, and it was born in a more accessible way of intervening into the realm of the virtual. So all of us have access to a computer, that have access to a database, that have access to these platforms. So especially when you talk about the performing arts, there is it's very problematic when you think about the translation from the event that takes place on the stage or on the rooftop or wherever, but it takes place somewhere physically in one single moment in time, even if it's repeated in different sessions. But at that very moment, there is this kind of like utopian reading in which we can think that everything is possible. You know, it's this moment in which the spectators and the actors can, I mean, one actor can forget their lines, or something extraordinary can happen. Like one of the days that we performed at the rooftops, Ocaña, Reina de las Ramblas, the brother of Ocaña was there presentially in the audience, and we didn't know. And actually, in the first picture that I shared, which if you allow me to share again, because it's actually a beautiful picture. I don't know. Here. So, okay. So in this one here, can you see it?
We can, yeah.
Okay. So this is actually the twin brother of Ocaña, who actually burned himself. Ocaña burned himself to death in the 1980s. So his twin brother came to see this, and you had the performer performing Ocaña. And he sat on top of Ocaña's twin brother without knowing that it was Ocaña's twin brother. So at the end of the show, there was a colloquium, and he raised his hand and he said, like, well, I'm sorry I need to go, but I wanted to say that I am Ocaña's twin brother, and this was the first time in 40 years, almost 40 years, that I actually think that I have seen him, and I'm really moved because it felt like I could touch him and I could hold him. So normally when an actor sits on the lap of a spectator, there's always this reaction of like uncomfortability, and you can see in the face that he's so like comfortable, he's so warm, because in a way this utopian performance allows him to touch his brother, and that is a really beautiful beautiful moment that I don't think can be achieved in the virtual world. So it's organized and set up by a different set of rules. So I think whereas the access in the world of the virtual is maybe it has a wider range, like during the crisis, during this last crisis, the pandemic crisis, I was an advisor at the Teatre Libre, and we arranged for this idea of like, let's try to take this an opportunity to broadcast our plays and to reach audience outside of Barcelona. So create a larger audience. So we gained something, but we also lost something. We lost this immediacy, this moment of unique utopian activity. So all this to say that I think that this kind of spaces for intervention in the physical world, in the it's not real because the virtual is real too, but this world of material world operate by different rules, I believe. So whenever you think queerly about the world of the virtual, I'm sure it can be done, but it should be done differently.
Mm. I understand. Thank you for that very full answer. We have two questions in the chat, and I'll begin first with Eddie then. And apologies, Eddie, for the problem then in hearing you. But the question Eddie has, well, first of all, an excellent lecture. Many thanks. In relation to the rooftop spaces, how does the question of social class structures in Barcelona connect with the use of the rooftop?
Wow, that's a very, very good question. Do we have like 45 more minutes?
No, unfortunately.
No, I'm just kidding. But in Barcelona, there is also within the city this tension between center and periphery, and in the center there are also different mini centers. So if you're having a house in the Eixample, it's not the same of living in a modest apartment in Raval. And of course the rooftops and the way the rooftops can be used or cannot be used also have a very, very direct and complex reading of class. So in the project of the rooftops, one of the things that they try, or we try to do, is we can go to one of those like prestigious buildings that have a rooftop that's very comfortable because they can also provide with seats and everything, and we organize an activity there. But I think it is also extremely important, if you're questioning the way you use public space or spaces that the community spaces, to go, and that's what happened, to more blue collar working class neighborhoods, or sometimes deprived neighborhoods, and bring the culture there, create an event there, and force the people that are interested in the arts to move from the center to a blue-collar neighborhood that would never visit otherwise, and attend an event, and mixed, again, this utopian reading, right? Mix with the people that are that live in the neighborhood, which probably would never happen in a regular situation, but share in this moment of communion the theatrical experience. So of course that doesn't change the morphology of the city. There's still center and periphery, but at least it provides this moment of questioning, this moment of exchange. No, it's Jane Jacobs was talked in The Death of Life of Great American Cities, in this idea of how during, like, in the street was a place where center and periphery could mingle, and at least that created a more gentle city. We try to do that with this idea of moving between different rooftops in different neighborhoods. And thank you for the question.
Thank you, and thank you, Eddie, for the question. Moving on, or moving backwards, really, to Maria Delgado's question. Maria, thank you for a fascinating lecture. Will COVID and the financial constraints it has brought also limit writers? Will theatres only be able to afford 2 or 3 handers? Is the age of the epic playwright Justicia, if that's the right pronunciation, excuse me, Catalan The Inheritance, temporarily over?
Yeah. Thank you for the question, and thank you for your work, Maria, actually. The effects of COVID in theaters are already, we can already feel them with the budget restrictions that the National and the theater are suffering, but also the fact that Sala Fenix, which was a vibrant independent venue in Barcelona, just closed this week. So it's already being felt. And I do imagine that, especially in the case of younger contemporary playwrights, we're going to find more and more of these 2 and 3 actors plays. It is kind of strange because, I mean, as when she mentions Justicia by Guillem Clua, it is too bad, because there was a moment in which, again, these big venues like Sala Gran were daring to actually bring this ambitious plays like Tem Salvatge or Justicia. But the COVID broke with that dynamic, really broke with that dynamic. Justicia, this play that by Guillem Clua, the play that Maria mentions, is extremely ambitious play that takes place through different. It takes place during a dinner in which this judge, who is about to retire, lives through his own life, and his own life is the life of Catalonia, with all the corruption and everything. And it is extremely ambitious. I can definitely see the parallelism with the Inheritance. Guillem Clua always establishes this dialogues with major Anglo-Saxon works. It was a play that was interrupted by the pandemic, and it could not be performed again. Actually, since the set design was so large, it had to be destroyed afterwards because there was no space. And the play actually won the National Theatre Award, which is something extraordinary because it's a Catalan play and a play written in Catalan. So for a Catalan play to win the National Theatre Award in Spain, it showed the extraordinary value of the play. And yet, we won't be able to see it again on stage because it's too expensive to produce, and what it was produced cannot be brought back to stage. So these are these terrible paradoxes and terrible paradoxes that the current pandemic are bringing, and which effects we'll have to study certainly in the future.
Thank you. And I wonder if there are no other questions, hand ups or in the chat. I wonder if Maria, you'd want to come back to that at all? Your own views? No.
Let me just see if I can unmute Maria 1 second.
Okay.
See,
we are controlled by technology.
Maria, if you're able, you can unmute.
Yeah, I can. Thank you. I completely agree with what you were saying. I think it's extraordinary that you get this epic play, and also a play that is a queering of the family drama. I mean, yeah. Which links into your thing. That was just, it's limited how much one can type on an iPad in terms of a question. But I think what's really interesting is you've got a queering of August, and you've got a queering of Long Jay's journey into night in many ways. And as you mentioned, I think those intersections with an Anglo queer dramaturgical tradition are very prevalent in Clua's work, and Smiley, of course. Is you began talking about Smiley, but I thought it was also really interesting. Sarah was talking about Marion Peter Holt, of course, who died recently. Yes. And I think it's wonderful that we're honouring David this evening, but it seemed a really lovely link into Marion's work. And of course, Marion had been a huge champion of Catalan and translators and mediator, a queer mediator in many ways of Catalan work, and it just feels nice to be able to find a new genealogy for David's work through Marion's work, through to your own as well. And the issue of the set, I think it goes back to ecological issues as well. I think there's some really interesting work to be done around queer ecologies that will link into some of the work around the greening and environmental concerns around set design, which, you know, the fact that they had to get rid of this extraordinary, beautiful, but also problematic set design that was about corruption, and the ways in which that links into wider kind of ecologies of performance making, and an environmental in the environment of performance, as well as broader kind of planetary. So thank you again for a wonderful lecture.
If you allow me to add that you absolutely agree with this mention of Marion Peter Holt, who was, unfortunately he died during the pandemic, so we could not pay the tribute that he deserves. So I hope that can be done in the near future. About the ecological implications of like the physicality of the stage in Guillem Clua's Justicia, which is it's too unfortunate. I will say that I absolutely agree. And it's interesting that it happens in a play that denounces corruption in the foundation of contemporary Catalan, the contemporary Catalan nation, and that it does so in a theater, in the heart of a theater that was actually that had a complicated relationship, let's say, with the former conservative government of Convergencia y Unió, and that had a problematic relationship with the first director, Josep Maria Flotats, and the way the theater was constructed, and the way the theater had to negotiate its way through the cultural sector. So there was this very, very complex and interesting relationship with the play as a text and as an artifact, and then the physicality of the mise en scène with the institution that was actually hosting the play, and that was interrupted by the pandemic, which is too bad, but at the same time it's interesting because it also was in a moment of transition when Xavier Albertí, the former artistic director, was leaving, and Carme Portacelli, the new artistic director, was landing, and I think that also had to play a part in those decisions. So when we scholars read texts, we're not, especially with this kind of things, we don't just read text, we read contexts. And I think this is important to be taken into account. Thank you so much.
Thank you. There are no more questions that I can see anyway. Eddie has just said what I think we're all thinking, just to thank you, Isaias, for the news of the theatre production scheduled for next year of David's work. I hope that will obviously travel and that we can see it in London too, you know, let's hope. Chris, wonderful, congratulations, Isaias, congratulations to the organisers for inviting him, a great gift for David. I think maybe that's the note on which we can end. You have given us a great gift for David on this 11th anniversary lecture, Isaias, so I want to thank you very much for that. I want to thank Sarah for the vote of thanks, for Ruth for introducing. For those who did miss any of the lecture, it has been recorded and it will be available soon, and I'll let you know through Eventbrite. There'll be a way of informing you when the recording is ready, so bear with us on that. It should be quite soon. So thank you everyone for coming. I apologize again for the technical difficulties. Let's hope we can be in the real world next year in the space of the picture gallery, and you're all welcome, and look forward to seeing you again next year. Okay, thank you for now.
Wonderful.
Sorry.